Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 23rd of April of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Complete disaster begins for Ukraine. So this is the 23rd of April of 2025, and the worst thing ever just begins for Ukraine. And the reason of this is that Zelensky yesterday made lots of statements regarding the US plans, US proposal about this peaceful settlement of the conflict. He was talking a lot, and the most important, Zelensky denied the most important demand from the United States of America, and we are talking about Crimea. Zelensky refused to recognize Crimea as a part of the Russian Federation de jure. He probably can recognize Crimea under control of the Russian Federation de facto, but it will not change anything. So this is the situation. He made his own choice. He made his decision. The gloves are off. Now it's turn of the Russian Federation and the United States of America. For example, this is the portrait of Trump that Putin gave him in March. The painting was delivered by Trump's special representative Witkov, who described it in an interview with Tucker Carlson as a beautiful portrait by a leading Russian artist. So this is the situation, and this portrait should tell us and should describe us the real relations between the United States of America and the Russian Federation. Telling the truth, I don't remember Zelensky, let's say, give anything like this to the President of the United States of America, which also means a lot. Anyway, we see that the situation is very difficult, that the relations between the United States of America and Ukraine are very difficult. Telling the truth, they are terrible. For example, we have lots of articles, lots of interesting updates that, for example, US President Donald Trump wants to conclude an agreement between Russia and Ukraine by April 30th to claim that he has fulfilled his peacekeeping mission in his first 100 days in office. So we understand that most likely nothing like this is going to happen during the next 7 days, even if the United States of America stops supplying and supporting Ukraine with weapons, arms, and the most important, with intelligence information. Anyway, once again, decisions were made, the gloves are off. The United States will withdraw from the negotiation process if Russia and Ukraine do not agree with US initiative to end the conflict, Vice President D.D. Vance said, Bloomberg reports. And of course, we understand that this is not about Russia. First of all, this is about Ukraine and its allies, because it's not just the position of Ukraine, let's say, about the territory integrity and Crimea. Today, for example, French office, Macron's office, decided to support Zelensky, and they stated that Macron's office issues ultimatum to the United States of America. Do you remember the last time when France issues any ultimatum to the United States of America? I don't remember anything like this. Territorial integrity of Ukraine is a non-negotiable demand for peace talks. That was stated by Macron's office, and he is not the only one who supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine. European Union will never recognize Crimea as Russian, says head of European diplomacy Kallas. So we see that European Union, of course, has common position, and we see that the United States of America and the Russian Federation have also more or less common position regarding the situation in Ukraine, regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously we are going to see, and Ukraine is going to face consequences of its decision very soon, probably even this week. For example, now we got lots of reports that Kiev is looking for a replacement for the American Starlink due to Musk's unpredictability. That was stated by Euronews. The threat from terminating the Ukraine Armed Forces access to the Starlink satellite network could have far-reaching consequences. We understand that Ukrainians, if it happens, Ukrainians will become completely blind and deaf when talking about military capabilities. They will not be able to see the rocket launches. They will not be able to see the concentration of the Russian forces. And I'll remind you that the last time when Starlink was turned off, the Ukrainians, let's say, didn't saw the time and the way how the Russians landed their infantry using the gas pipeline in the vicinity of the city by the name of Suja, and that situation led to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense. If something like this happens again, we don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians will be able to slow down the Russians. Today we got another very interesting article that Zelensky promised the Europeans, he promised Macron, he promised the United Kingdom that he is going to mobilize another 600,000 soldiers during the next 3-4 months with the purpose to replace his losses and to hold the lines to get another year probably of fightings, hoping that something or anything will be changed or changes in the very near future. Now let's go to the ground. Let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact, and first let's talk about the northern part of the Sumu region. From this area we have two very interesting and very important videos. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover another position, another huge base of the armored forces of Ukraine in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Yampol, and then we see how the Russians destroyed this base with several strikes. The sources reported that the Russians attacked this territory with FAPs. As a result of attack, the Ukrainians lost another base. We don't know the exact number of losses. Another video also from the northern part of the Sumu region we got today, and here we can see almost the same story. The Russians discovered another concentration of Ukrainian forces, and then the Russians destroyed these units and these forces with FAP. So we see that the Russians, after the Ukrainians rejected the peaceful plan of the United States of America, intensified their activities, and the Russians we see currently intensify their activities exactly in the northern direction, where the Ukrainians has less defenses and less, let's say, powerful defense belt in comparison with, for example, the southern part of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sumy direction itself. According to information we have, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours managed to restore control over the northern part of the settlement by the name of Loknya. This video today was published by the Russian side, and here we can see how Ukrainian drone attacked, how the Russian drone attacked the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the northern part of the settlement of Loknya. Based on this video, we adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor, and we see that, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 22nd of April, and this is the situation by the end of the 23rd of April of 2025. The Ukrainians restore control. The Russians currently control the village of Basovka and the tree lines around. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the village by the name of Miropolye. The situation here for the Ukrainians is very difficult, but now it's become even completely worse because the Russians established complete control over the church and this complex. Basically, the Russians control currently the strategical elevations in this direction, and according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians crossed the river of Psol, and now the Russians are trying to concentrate their forces basically on the Ukrainian side of this river. The thing is that the Russians are planning to attack the settlement of Miropolye, and most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions on the territory of this settlement because this settlement is located in the lowlands, and the Russians can see everything from the settlement. The Russians can see the movements of Ukrainian forces, the temporary deployment points, and this is one of the videos that was published today. Here we can see the settlement of Miropolye and the very heavy fire from the Russian side. The Russians can see everything, the temporary deployment points, the positions of FPV drone operators, and when the Russians see everything, they start bombing and attacking the territory. In this video we can see how another FPV drone operator's base was destroyed, and in this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the northern part of Miropolye with artillery, with FAPs, and with cluster rounds. So we understand that the Russians are preparing the northern part before the beginning of offensive operation. So the village of Miropolye would be taken by the Russians most likely without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. Another important thing is that there is a river, the river of Psol, and this river of Psol blocks the Ukrainians from the northwest, from the west, and from the southwest. So the Ukrainians have just one small corridor for supplying their forces in this area, which is obviously not enough to create and to have strong positions on the territory of the settlement itself. So we expect that the Russians are planning to cut the salient as a part of the Russian plan to create secure zone along the border with Ukraine on the territory of the Sumy region. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction, where we see that every single day the Russians intensify their activities. First of all, the Russians increase the number of strikes on the territory of the settlement of Poltava and Kharkiv. As you can see, both cities are located on the main, let's say, supply line, railway line that goes from the city of Kharkiv towards the city of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. And the Russians, as you can see, establish complete control over this territory, not allowing allowing the Ukrainians to bring additional forces, reinforcements, reserves, arms to the territory of the city of Kharkiv, where the Russians once again intensify their activities. We start receiving more and more updates of how the Russians are bombing and attacking the settlements of Lipsy, the settlement of Volchansk and its agglomeration. So we can't say for sure when exactly the Russians are planning this offensive, but most likely the Russians are planning to do this very soon. And if the United States of America turn the Ukrainians off the Starlink system network, then the Russians most likely will start this offensive operation immediately. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Kharkiv direction, the northern Kupiansk area. According to information we have, there are very heavy clashes for the northwestern part of the settlement of Kupiansk. The Russians continue bombing the territory of the city, trying to destroy as many as possible temporary deployment points and of course as many as possible bases of the FPV drone operators of the armored force of Ukraine. In this video we can see how another temporary deployment point was destroyed. Currently there are very heavy clashes for the line between Kondrashovka and Radkovka. The Russians are attacking the Ukrainian positions. The Ukrainians show fierce resistance. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Liman direction. We got probably the third day in a row when we don't receive anything from this area. The latest Russian updates, Russian offensive, and let's say changes on the ground in the Russian favor took place probably before the Easter. That's finished 3 days ago. So as for now, no changes. Most likely there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Redkadup-Nova. The Ukrainians most likely during the Easter ceasefire managed to bring additional forces and to stabilize the situation. Now the Russians need probably a day or two, let's say, to break the Ukrainian resistance and to move further towards the river of Nitrius. And with this, with taking under control the river of Nitrius, the Russians will be able to begin offensive towards the city of Liman itself. And obviously, and based on the experience we have from 2022, the Russians most likely will be able to finish the battle for Liman very fast, much faster than the situation develops right now. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation for the most important direction. We're talking about the settlement of Konstantinovka, where we have the biggest number of icons, the biggest number of geolocations, and which tell us and give us more or less reliable understanding of the situation on the ground. First, let's talk about the changes. We have added water reservoir and we have added, let's say, rivers in this area. First, we have added the Kliban-Bytska reservoir itself, so very huge one, and we have added a river and reservoirs between the settlement of Tarasivka and the Kliban-Bytska reservoirs itself. So now we understand and we see a real pocket. We see the pocket that Ukrainians are fighting for. We see the strategical pocket that the Russians are trying to take under control, and where the Russians have the biggest progress and advance probably along the entire, in comparison with other front lines along the entire line of combat contact. So this is the pocket where the Russians are trying to advance, and today we got, as you can see, lots of updates from this territory. And probably the most important one is that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Tarasivka. This report today was published by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. This is the situation on the ground by the end of the 22nd of April. The Ukrainians, as you can see, according to the map on the 22nd of April, still had possibilities to supply their forces from the settlement of Novopoltavka in the direction of Alexandropol and then further in the eastern directions towards the settlement of Zarya. But now we see that by the end of the 23rd of April, the Ukrainians lost possibilities to do this. And later, also during this day, we got this video where we can see how the Russians were attacking the settlement of Tarasivka, and in this video we can see the entire process, how the Russians were fighting for the settlement of Tarasivka since winter of 2025 till early or mid-spring of 2025. And in the final part of this video, as we can see, a Russian soldier that was waving with the Russian flag in the most northern part of the settlement. This is exactly the place where the Russian soldier was raising with the Russian flag. And based on the report of the Minister of Defense, based on this video with the Russian flag, we have adjusted the map completely. And this is basically something like a wall, something like a barrier that was established by the Russians on the western flank. Yes, Ukrainians still have possibilities to bring forces through the settlement of Novalenovka, but once again, again too many water barriers, too many, let's say, poor quality surface that Ukrainians can't basically use for normal supply and support of their contingent on the territory of Zarya and in the central part of this pocket. So basically the western, let's say, wall, the western, let's say, barrier was established by the Russians when talking about Kliban-Bytsky cauldron that the Russians are trying to create right now. At the same time, the Russians intensify their offensives on the eastern flank, and today, as a result of another offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this stronghold. This stronghold was geolocated, this video was geolocated. This is exactly the area where the Russians were attacking and where the Russians were under attack, are being attacked by Ukraine FPV drones. So we see that right now the Russians are trying to attack from the settlement of Leonidovka in the northwestern directions towards this water barrier and towards the settlement by the name of Romanovka. And the Russians are trying also to outflank the settlement of Sherbinovka from the west and from the southwest. The Ukrainians are trying to concentrate their forces in this part in the vicinity of the river of Kryvyi Tarets with the purpose to repel possible upcoming Russian attacks, but the Russians see all these concentrations and the Russians are bombing and attacking this territory with FABs, with aviation. So Ukrainians have no chances to collect their forces here and to repel a possible upcoming attacks in the very near future. So now we see the Russians are advancing on the western flank. The Russians are advancing and improving their positions on the eastern flank, trying to cut this pocket from supply and support and to get as close as possible to N20 road and to this bridge in the vicinity of Kliban-Bytsky water reserve with the purpose to establish complete fire control with drones. Currently the distance to this main logistic hub and the edge positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation is already less than 10 kilometers, which is obviously already nothing for the Russian FPV drones. Soon we believe we are going to receive hundreds of videos exactly from this area where the Russians destroy vehicles, infantry and forces that Ukrainians try to send in the southern direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation in this pocket. This is a strategical battle. This is the beginning of the major battle of 2025 in Ukraine-Russian conflict. At the same time, the Russians continue advancing in the southern part. Today we got additional videos from the settlements of Sukhaya Balka where we can see Russian soldiers that were waving with the Russian flag, another evidence of complete and strong control over the territory. Furthermore, pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to advance far behind the settlement of Sukhaya Balka in the direction of the settlement by the name of Romanovka. So we see that currently the Ukrainians can't do anything with this. They just can wait and sit and wait when the Russians will finish the battle for this pocket and will come to the outskirts of the southern part of Konstantinovka and the southwestern part, southwestern edge of Konstantinovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, after very heavy artillery preparation, the Russians began offensive in the direction of the village by the name of Stara Nikolaevka. In this video we can see how the Russians were destroying Ukrainian positions before another ground operation. And according to different mappers, according to neutral mappers, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions and to take several positions to the south of the settlement of Stara Nikolaevka. So this is another direction of Russian offensive operation. So we can't say for sure when exactly the Russians are able to finish the battle for this pocket, but obviously we can start counting weeks, not months, but weeks before the end of this battle. And if the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory, and of course the Russians will also try to establish complete control over the city of Chasiv, but by the same time the Russians will be able to take these territories under complete control, which is already the beginning of battle for the city of Konstantinovka from the south, from the southwest, from the southeast and from the east. We believe that by the same time the Russians will try to finish the battle for the city of Chasiv and to establish complete control over something like this. At the same time, we expect that by the time the Russians finish the battle for this pocket for the territories along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, by the same time the Russians will try to finish the battle for the Liman direction and to establish complete control over the territories along the river of Nitrius, the city of Liman, and the territories along the river of Seversky Donetsk. So this is the primary target for the Russians on the northern direction. And now if we zoom out, we can see the entire picture. This is probably the beginning of the middle part of the major battle of 2025. We're talking about the line Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk and Slaviansk, and we see that from this configuration most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the city of Siversk. And when talking about dates, about some deadlines, we believe that this situation we are going to see somewhere by the end or by the beginning of June of 2025. Of course, if nothing happens, of course, if Ukrainians are not able to find any solution how to settle this conflict or how to return the supply and support of the United States of America on the previous level of 2025 during the Joe Biden office and Joe Biden administration. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. As for this area, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special that can change the situation on the ground. And almost the same story is taking place in the, let's say, Novopavlovka direction. But when talking about this area, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Bogatyr. This is already 6th or 7th day in a row when the Russians try to answer the southeastern part of the settlement, but as for now we see that Ukrainians hold their lines. The Ukrainians managed to repel every single attack that took place, that have taken place since probably the beginning of the previous week, and now we see that the Russians continue their attempts, but we see that the southeastern part of the village of Bogatyr was already reduced to ruins. Anyway, despite the fact that the Russians haven't managed to answer the southeastern part itself, we made some adjustments on map based on the videos that were published by the Ukrainians. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking Russian vehicles to the southeast of the settlement of Bogatyr and to the northwest of the city of the village of Rozliv. So just small adjustments. There are very heavy clashes in between these two villages. Let's wait and see what is going to be next. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special that can change the situation on the ground. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.